As a licensed sprayer, you know the importance of calibration. You know that this is something you should do at least once a year, even though it can be hard to find the time to do it, especially in the spring when there are a lot of other tasks to do. In the process of calibrating, you'll be checking the output of the liquid for the calibration process. You'll be using plain water, of course, and measuring how many gallons per acre that you're applying. And from that, with the dilution rate, you can figure out and double check and make sure that you're applying your spray materials at the right amount, how many ounces per acre or pounds per acre that you should be adding. The calibration process also will help you to check the distribution of that spray. Is it reaching the target, whether it's the tops of the plant or whether it's the leaves underneath or the entirety of that plant? Are you reaching the lower leaves? Those can be particularly tough to reach. And are you reaching the undersides of the leaves? And that's something that can be really important for certain insect and disease pests. With some of the tools that you'll hear about today, you can also get a sense of whether or not the droplet size that's being applied is appropriate for your use. If you are not able to check and confirm that all of these things are appropriate, then you may be risking an unsuccessful application. An over-application is one that we talk about a lot, especially because it can be an off-label use of material. And of course, there are potential fines with that, with the Board of Pesticides control. From a grower perspective, though, it's also really important to remember that an over-application can be an unneeded cost, and nobody needs that. As the applicator, you are at highest risk of exposure to the chemicals that you're applying, even though the pesticides that are labeled and you're able to use have been tested and they are deemed to have a benefit in the way that if they're used according to labels, there is still a risk to you. We talk sometimes most about acute risks, things that happen right away after an exposure, but some of these risks are long-term and are cumulative. So it's worthwhile to make sure that you are applying according to the label to minimize your risk and exposure. Over-applications can also affect non-target organisms, whether it's something like affecting your desired crop plant when you're using a selective herbicide in the field, or affecting beneficial insects in a way that you don't need to. They can affect off-site organisms as well. And finally, there can be unexpected carryover with herbicides and affecting a crop in a subsequent year. Over-applications get a lot of the attention, but under-applications are really important to avoid also. Obviously, if you don't apply enough material or if it's improperly distributed, say in strips, some applying too much material, some applying too little, the coverage isn't going to be effective and the pests are likely to survive. They can cause damage themselves and lead to yield and quality reductions. Sometimes an under-application means that you need to go back in and retreat, and that's both time and materials, and both of those equal money. There's also an increased chance of pests developing resistance to those chemicals, and we want to avoid that at all costs also. So you may be checking your sprayer just by knowing how many gallons are going in and how many acres you're applying. And if those numbers work out right for the delivery rate that you're expecting, isn't that enough? Well, not really. I mean, that's good in the big picture, but you do want to double check and make sure what the individual nozzles are doing. What is the actual rate that's coming out of each nozzle, and what's the pattern of application that's coming out? And you'll hear more about this later. And you want to double check that the boom height is correct and that the overlap is proper. Again, a concept you'll hear more about. Maybe your sprayer has a rate controller, and so do you still need to be double checking with manual calibration? Yeah, you might actually need to do that. The rate controller uses sprayer speed in its calculations, and so sometimes that sprayer speed is determined by counting revolutions of the rear wheel. That may or may not lead to coverage of the amount of ground that's anticipated. It might be a different tire size than the calculations are based on, or a different tire pressure, or slippage due to ground conditions. So it's important to measure that speed to confirm that, to find out exactly what is happening there in the field. And the rate controller won't necessarily determine issues with individual nozzles, so checking that's important too. Chances are your sprayer is going to need some adjustments. Recent studies show that about 2/3 of the applicators have issues with their sprayers, with their applications, from improper calibration or to specific challenges with the nozzles. Other issues frequently found are inaccurate travel speed or improper boom height, problems with the pressure gauge, or wrong hose sizes for delivery. So it is important, no matter what, to take the time to do some manual calibration, at least once a year, but also when you make significant changes to your sprayer or spray materials.
So welcome to Sprayer Calibration Review. Today on the call we have myself, Lily Calderwood, and I'm the Wild Blueberry Specialist for Maine Cooperative Extension. And we have three other experts with us. Mark Hutchinson, who's an extension educator from Knox-Lincoln counties, Jim Dale, who's a pest management specialist, and Jason Lilly, who's a sustainable agriculture professional in Cumberland County. And without further ado, we'll start our kind of roundtable discussion about sprayer calibration. So Mark, our first question is, what are the most common reasons that a sprayer is not calibrated correctly?
A lot of reasons for poorly calibrated sprayers. Worn nozzles that have been used for years and not really checked can be a cause of calibration. They lose their pattern and their pressure in the nozzle themselves. O-rings in the different pressure areas should be checked. They can be old and dry, cracked, and losing pressure around those O-rings. Boom height is important, because if you're too high or too low, and we'll talk about later, but that will also change the amount of spray that's actually being applied. If your pressure gauge and your pressure regulator is not correct, or they're too high or too low, it's going to give you an incorrect calibration. So you should check your pressure gauge at the beginning of the season and occasionally during the season. If you have plugged nozzles, they really shouldn't be a significant issue if your pressure regulator is working. But again, if you're going to plug nozzles on purpose, you should recalibrate and check that. If they are plugged because of the material being plugging the nozzle, it should be adjusted through the pressure regulator. But again, you're going to have incorrect spray patterns with plugged nozzles. If your tractor doesn't have a speedometer that is working correctly, and you're either too fast or too slow on the speedometer, that's going to change the rate of your speed that you're using to calculate the ground speed that you need. So you need to calibrate your speedometer if possible. And then also, if you have leaky hoses, that material is obviously not going directly in through the spray nozzle, so it's being lost in the process. So making sure that all nozzles and fittings and hose nozzles and fittings are tight on the machine is important as well for calibration. So moving on, how do different types of pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, herbicide differ in their application?
Yes, so we have some differences between insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. Insecticides, if you think of an insect walking on your crop, they're very mobile. And so the products are similarly designed, often not to directly hit an insect, because it would be so difficult to actually hit an insect on target from above. You know, you'd have to have that insect walking across the leaf at the time of spray. So they're rarely direct contact. They're often secondary contact, which means the spray is applied to in even coverage across the crop to the specific feeding location in some cases, and with the expectation that the insect is going to either walk over that insecticide where it will be absorbed, or it will walk and feed on this insecticide. With fungicides, we want to have even better coverage. You know, it's really important to have a small droplet size when applying fungicides, because we want to get coverage on the top and the bottom of the leaf, where you have the possibility that the fungi is on both sides of the leaf. And something that can help with this, air induction can help you get the material into the full canopy of the crop. And another tool that can help is this water sensitive paper. And these are cards, they're yellow cards that you can buy. And you put them out in the field at different heights in the canopy of your crop, different locations. And then you'll run your spray across the field as you would. And you can go back and look at these cards to see what your coverage was like and what your droplet size is like, and make adjustments accordingly. Another another difference in pesticides are, we have translaminar products and we have systemic products. So translaminar are applied to the leaf, and they do not move much further than that leaf. So, there are quite a few fungicides like this that are applied to the leaf, but they're not entirely systemic. They stay within that leaf area, whereas systemic products will be applied to the ground or the crop or the weed, and they move throughout the entire plant. We also have pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides, which is important to understand. Pre-emergent herbicides are applied to the ground before the weeds come up. So an early spring application. This is a picture of a blueberry field. So we're applying our pre-emergent herbicides to something like this, whereas post-emergent herbicides would be applied after the weeds emerge. So they are very different products, and you want to pay attention to what your pest is and what you're trying to target and what stage your crop is at, so that you don't damage your crop, but you do manage the pest. One last thing on this topic I wanted to mention is that weed mapping can be a good way for farms to identify exactly where a weed problem is and to target those areas. So you're limiting the amount of material you need to put out there. You're saving time, money, and environmental impact. Our next question is for Jim. How does tractor speed influence the rate of application?
Yeah, speed is one of those things that we get a lot of questions on when they're trying to change the application rate in the field. And truly, if you just need to make a very small impact on your application rate, you may adjust the speed. But what happens is, the faster you go, the less material is applied, and of course, the slower you go, more material is applied. So if you double the rate of speed you're traveling at, you get half the rate of pesticide going out on that area. So it can have a big impact. So that's why when you calibrate your sprayer, especially if you're doing it on a pavement or outside of the field with water in your tank, and you're set at going at a certain speed, you got to make sure you're going at that same speed in the field. Otherwise, it can be off.
Following along with that same thinking and allowing for drift, how can risk of drift be reduced, Jim?
Well, one of the things is that you got to really be careful of is your pressure. As you increase the pressure, a couple of things can happen. You can get a greater shear in the droplet size coming out, and therefore it makes finer droplets, and those finer droplets are much more prevalent to off-target drift. And with pressure to change, again, the same question will come up about changing your pressure. to actually change your calibration. And what would happen with calibration if you wanted to double your output with changing your pressure, you would have to increase the pressure by 4 times to double the output. If you do that, you're going to come into a lot of other problems. You could have hoses break, you could have many other things. So certainly we don't suggest increasing that pressure to change your output rate, again, because pressure, the higher the pressure, the more drift. Wind speed, same thing, is you want a little bit of wind out there. It helps the application better. But once you get up to about 10 miles per hour, you start seeing that you can get off-target drift. And there's regulations with the Board of Pesticides that said you can't spray after 15 miles per hour wind speed. So you want to certainly make sure you know what the wind speed is when you're out there. And boom height too. The closer you are to the crop, then the less chance there is of drift. If you raise that boom up, you have more space for wind to impact. And plus, if it's a boom sprayer and you've got uneven ground, if you raise that boom, you can get a lot of bouncing. And if you get bouncing, the end of the boom can raise up. One end will go down, one end will go up. And as that end goes up, that allows the spray also to drift. So boom height can be very important. So you want to keep it down close to the crop.
Jim, as farmers in the field, how can they look at the wind speed? What are some indications of wind speed?
Actually, if you're a certified applicator, you can actually go to the core manual. And you should have a copy of the core manual. In the core manual, there's a page in there that actually discusses wind speed. And it, like you can look at the leaves or the crop and see how it's moving. And that will give you some indication of what the wind speed is, from a light wind to even down to almost miles per hour. You can actually come pretty close to what the actual mileage is. And of course, some growers actually have wind gauges, so you can actually take it out there and measure the wind speed, so you actually know. And of course, that's the more accurate way of doing it. And I would recommend, if you, of course, are spraying a lot, which most farmers may be, you might want to invest into a wind gauge so you know the speed, because it's just a handheld piece of equipment.
So Jason, how low should my boom sprayer be for a 10-inch tall crop?
All right, so there's a couple of different factors that go into deciding at what height you should run your boom. If you look at the nozzles that you have on your sprayer, you're likely going to have two types, or two categories of nozzles. There's going to be an 80-degree pattern that the spray material comes out of the nozzle at, or 110. So just thinking of some basic geometry, if your nozzles are 20 inches apart and you've got an 80-degree spray angle, you want your boom to be about 30 inches above the target in order to achieve the optimal amount of overlap. So with any spray material, the further that you get towards the edge of that spray angle, you're going to have slightly less material being applied on this outside edge. So you want to make sure that that spray material gets overlapped by about 30% between the material that comes out of nozzle number 1 and nozzle number 2. So so you've got some good overlap here. So again, we got an 80-degree spray nozzle, and if that's what you're working with, you want that to be about 30 inches above the target. So if you've got a 10-inch tall crop plus that 30 inches above the target, you want to run your boom at 40 inches off the ground. So if you've got your 110-degree nozzles, you're still trying to achieve that 30% overlap, but because it's a wider angle, you can run that lower to the ground. So you want these 110-degree nozzles to ride 20 inches above your target. So that should give you, with this 10-inch tall crop, 30 inches that your boom should be up off the ground. So if we're looking to identify what type of nozzle you have, there's a lot of information right on the nozzle itself. So I'm just going to use this example from TJet. If we look up at the top line, we see that this type of nozzle is an XR, which just within TJet, that means that it's an extended range nozzle, and the way that the material is distributed out of the nozzle onto the crop, this fits into that category of their extended range. If you look down at the bottom, there's usually a series of numbers and letters there. And the first numbers, you'll likely see an 80 or a 110. So those first three numbers refer to the angle that the spray material is going to come out of the nozzle. So on this one, we see that's a 110-degree angle. The next two numbers refer to usually the amount of material that will come out of the nozzle at 40 psi. So it's usually standardized at 40 psi there. So this particular nozzle should give you 0.4 gallons per minute at 40 psi. And the last two letters here, this VS, that refers to the material that the nozzle itself is made out of. And in this case, that's a stainless steel.
Great, thank you. So Lily, if I only have an airblast sprayer, but I need to spray a low crop, how many nozzles should I close?
Well, it would depend on the height of your crop again, and it would depend on your target pest. We want to think about the structure of the crop that you're applying to, how tall it is, and how thick it is. In general, you might consider closing the top three nozzles. So above a 90-degree angle, you would close above that. And however, if you are applying, let's say you're applying a pre-emergent herbicide, which would be applied to the ground, you might plug all of them except for the bottom two. And so when plugging nozzles, Mark, how do I safely do this?
So there are a couple of different mechanisms. If the sprayer is going to be used so that you're going to plug nozzles for an extended period of time, and you have a need for those to be plugged, then you can actually disassemble it and put in a brass blank, which will plug those nozzles. And I would recommend these if it's something that you commonly do, and you have no need to actually go back and to use those nozzles on a regular basis. If it's something that you are using the sprayer for multiple different functions and you need those nozzles on and off all the time, you can use a quick shut off. And what shut off nozzles, and basically what it is you basically turn the nozzles on. There's a valve or a shut off that works there. You shut them off when you don't need them, and you just turn them back on when you need them. The advantage of these quick shut offs is that there's no need to disassemble and reassemble the spraying nozzles at that point in time.
So Mark, do plugged air blast sprayer nozzles change the PSI of the product that's being applied? And kind of in the similar vein, if we go in and plug a nozzle, does that have an impact on the pressure?
So no, if you plug nozzles, it should not change the sprayer pressure output. That's regulated through your pressure regulator. So if your pressure regulator is functioning properly, the pressure coming out of the nozzles, no matter how many you plug or how many you have open, should not change. However, as a precaution, you always want to go back and you want to check your pressure regulator when you plug nozzles to see if it is actually maintaining that pressure, and make sure your pressure regulator is reading correctly.
And what is the proper way to clean a nozzle?
So this is the one where you do not want to take and just blow into it, take the nozzle off and in the field and blow into it. You know, you can have blowback into your face and into your eyes, into your nose, into your mouth, and you know these are pesticides, and they're not meant for human consumption. So one of the best ways you can do it is you should just carry a can of compressed air with you in the field, so you can just take a little squirt of the compressed air and either in the same direction the pesticide is going to move out. Usually that doesn't work. You usually have to do it so it's blowing back through where it came from. So just be careful when if it's got a little spray nozzle to it, that you don't jam it in there and crack the nozzle by forcing it in there. But the compressed air should be able to blow most of those little particles, sand particles or dirt particles out. But again, it's disassembling it, blowing it out. Again, when you disassemble, make sure you have the proper PPE, whether it be gloves that you need to wear to disassemble and put it back together. You can also use a soft bristled brush, and soft again because you start using a hard wire brush, and the hard wire can do damage to the size of the opening and to the cracking of the nozzle itself. So a soft wire brush is usually the best way to go. And again, that brush will probably need some assistance, just the abrasive part of it, but you're going to have to remove that particle, whatever is in there. Banging it out or blowing it out with the compressed air is probably going to be needed along with the brushing. If you're cleaning at the end of the season, you can take the nozzles off at the end of the season and place them in a bucket of water for soaking and let those really clean well so that you get any residual buildup on the side of the nozzles taking off. So at the end of the season, using water to soak them is an acceptable method. You do need to be concerned about where the bucket of water goes. So, hopefully you're on some type of spray pad and be able to put that material down where you clean out your sprayers, and also be aware of just cleaning out the bucket that you use to soak your nozzles in, that also needs to be properly cleaned at the end of it and the end of the use. So Lily, how do I calculate how much insecticide to put in the sprayer?
All right, so let's say I'm a wild blueberry grower and it's late May, early June, and I notice a big patch of bare ground or defoliated leaves in my field. And it turns out these are blueberry flea beetle, which is common. So our threshold for blueberry flea beetle is 30 to 50 larvae per 10 sweeps. So you get out your sweep net, you're doing your sweeps, and you do find that you have 60 larvae per 100 sweeps or so. And that is over the threshold. So I'm going to decide that I'm going to spray, and the larvae are small enough for me to still make a spray application and be successful. With this particular pest, you would not want to spray if the larvae were larger or if they were starting to curl up a little bit, which would indicate that they're about to pupate and fall to the ground, where they would be protected from your spray. So timing is important, but let's say I've timed it properly. The larvae are still pretty small, but I can tell that this is a real problem. And I'm going to apply a Sale 70 wettable powder, which I already have. But the first thing I need to do, I can't just go spray this material. I need to make sure that my sprayer was calibrated. And hopefully this was done earlier, so you don't have to spend a lot of time doing it now. You've planned ahead, you're going to have spray applications, so you've calibrated already. And this is what you did. This is just a review of calibrating a boom sprayer using the 1/128th method. And we have resources, including worksheets that you can use to do this on your own. And we also have some resources at the end of this presentation that can be very helpful to you. So we're using the 1/28th method because there are 128 fluid ounces in a gallon. And we can easily extrapolate ounces to gallons per acre using this method. So less math, which we all appreciate. So the first thing you want to do is inspect the tractor and the sprayer to check to see if there are any broken nozzles. You know, is the tank empty? Has it been rinsed? Is there clean water in there for you to do this process? That's very important. And then the next thing you're going to do is measure the distance between nozzles. And a common distance is 18 or 20 inches. Let's say I measured them and I've got 20 inches between each nozzle. So then you're going to look at your boom sprayer chart, which should have come with it. And you look on there, you're like, okay, I've got 20 inches between nozzles. I'm going to have the tractor travel 204 feet and time that, the amount of time that it takes the travel to travel that distance at the speed that I will be going when I apply this product. So we time how long it takes the tractor to go 204 feet at the miles per hour or RPM, whichever you're looking at, when that is the speed you're going to go when you spray. So let's say it took 37 seconds. Now we've written that number down. We're going to use that number in the next step, which is to turn on the tractor and get the pressure gauge to match the PSI that is on the nozzle. So in Jason's example, the nozzle we looked at was 40 PSI. So we want to make sure that the pressure gauge on the tractor is reading 40 PSI as well. And this is the stage where we're going to measure how much water comes out of each nozzle for this 30 seconds. 37 seconds was the amount of time it took our tractor to go this 204 feet. So let's say we caught about 20 ounces each time. And you know, you don't have to catch 20 ounces every time. You can catch 18 ounces on a few, 21 on another few, 22 would be okay on one. So plus or minus 10% is fine. If you have a nozzle that's clearly plugged, that's a really good indication. You need to clean it out or get a new nozzle. So that's helpful in its own right. All right, so now we've got, let's say there are 10 nozzles on our boom sprayer. We have a value for each one. We have the number of ounces that came out of each nozzle. And we're going to make an average. And let's say our average is 20 ounces per nozzle for this area that we traveled, which is 1/128th of an acre. And because we did, because we used such simple units of measure, we're able to have these ounces equal the gallons per acre. So we are putting out 20 gallons per acre of product. So.
Lily, can I jump in there?
Yes, please.
So you had mentioned, you know, if you're measuring the output from each nozzle and you find out that one is plugged or one is worn out, so you have way more, say you have 25 or 30 ounces that are coming out of that nozzle, it's really important to go and to replace that nozzle with the same type. I know when I was a younger buck working on farms that I would just go and grab whatever nozzle to replace that one that I needed to swap out with. And you're going to have very different results and spray patterns and output from a different style or different model of nozzle.
That's really good advice. Anyone else have calibration tips?
Actually, if I can jump in there for a second too. If you replace a nozzle, make sure, again, you collect the output from it, because as Jason just pointed out, you know, maybe that old one was really worn, but the point is all of those nozzles could be worn, and you put a new nozzle in there and it may be way under what the other ones are because they're worn too, not as badly as the other one, but now you've got this brand new nozzle in there that's, quote, underperforming by the other standards, and you may have to replace many nozzles rather than just that one. So that's always something you got to be aware of too.
And this is something you should do on an annual basis, because as you inspect your tractor and the time it takes to travel, things like tire wear can make a difference on the speed at which you travel at 204 feet. So it's an annual calibration.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing that might happen is a lot of boom sprayers will have, and airblast will have a quick change connection where you'll have 3 or 4 nozzles that you can just rotate the switch to the different types of nozzles or to the blank. And you can, there's a chance that you could accidentally, hit something and switch one of those so that you're on a different type of nozzle, or you're in between nozzles, or you're on a blank and you're not aware of it. So it's just important to do a visual walkthrough, run down the boom, and make sure that everything is on that same nozzle type.
Great. So we have identified that our tractor is indeed putting out 20 gallons of liquid per acre. And we want to now go to our label. And so this is directly from the Assail 70 WP label. They're different types of Assail. And we're going down the label, and we see low bush blueberry. That's a crop we're applying to. And our rate is 2.3 ounces per acre. That's an important number we want to keep in mind when we're doing our calculation. And then another really important critical piece of information that's on the label is the gallons per acre required. So this means that the product, Assail, needs to be applied in 20 gallons of water as a minimum per acre. So thankfully, our sprayer is calibrated to apply 20 gallons per acre. If it wasn't, you would need to adjust it. And how would we adjust it? Anyone want to chime in there? If we needed to change it, how would we do that?
You could put in a new type of nozzle that has a different gallons per minute application rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could change your speed, or you could change your PSI.
But remember, from what we said before, if you got to make a major change, the best way to do that is by changing the nozzles, which was just Jason's first suggestion. Because changing the other two things, the pressure or the speed, that's okay if it's just a little variation. But it takes a big change, as I said, in the pressure to make much of a change. So speed is okay too, but if you want to make a big change the nozzle, as was pointed out first.
Great. So according to the Assail label, we're ready to apply 2.3 ounces in no less than 20 gallons of water per acre. And our application area, we know, is going to be 5 acres of the larger 20-acre field, because we scouted the field, we used our sweep net, and we know that this pest outbreak is isolated to 4 to 5 acres. And with this particular pest, you can see this whole defoliated patch, and the pest is actually expanding further into your crop, surrounding that patch than what immediately meets the eye. So it's important to do your scouting no matter what pest you're looking for or trying to manage. We also know that our tank will hold 300 gallons. So we can now do this easy calculation. We have 2.3 ounces per acre times our 5 acres. That's 11.5 ounces of Assail that will need to be applied in 20 gallons per acre times 5 acres, which is 100 gallons of water. So our tank will hold that 100 gallons of water. And you're not quite done. You do need to read further in the label to understand if there are any other instructions on applying this material. Because Assail is a wettable powder, WP, it needs to be agitated. in the tank before application.
So, Mark, how would you go about dividing up the pounds or ounces per acre for the whole season into split applications?
So each of the different types of pesticides may have restrictions on the amounts that can be applied each year. So it's really critical that you read the label at the beginning of the season if that's a pesticide that you're going to use for whether it be a fungicide, insecticide, herbicide, miticide, whatever the pesticide may be. Read the label at the beginning of the year to see what the total application amount will be for the year. So, and then once you understand what the label says, you need to determine by scouting what the pest pressure is at that particular time of year, and that may help you determine the actual application rate that you're going to put out, because many of these pesticides have ranges of materials that can be used at particular times of the year. And then you're going to probably do split applications during the course of the year. So the example that I use is Sinbar, which is a common herbicide used in strawberry production systems. So the label says that the maximum application rate is 8 ounces per year, and that's usually split into 3 different applications. Usually you do a initial application at planting in the planting year, and this is at 2 to 3 ounces. And then you will do another early summer application, which can be 2 to 6 ounces, and then after dormancy, which is a 2 to 4 ounce rate. If you apply these at all of these at the maximum rate, you can see that you quickly go over the 8 ounce limitations, annual limitations in early summer, and don't have anything left for the dormancy period. So the max, at the high rates, it's a total of 13 ounces, and you're 5 ounces over. So you have to decide, maybe it's a 2 ounces at planting, 4 ounces in the early summer, and then 2 ounces again at dormancy, or some combination thereof. And again, it really depends on the pressure that you're getting from the particular pest that you have, and the time of year, and when you think you will get the most efficacy from that spray application and at what rate. But reading the label at the beginning of the year is critical. It doesn't do you any good to read the label at the end of the year when you're saying, oh, how much do I have left that I can spray that particular product.
So Mark, before you move on, I have a question. What happens if you did spray it at the maximum rate each time? All 3 times. Now you're at 13 ounces or whatever, as you said. What? All right. So what?
So it would be considered an off or an illegal use of that product.
Yeah. Since it's a label violation, you could be hauled in by the Board of Pesticide Control if they found out, of course. And so the problem would be that's a finable offense. So you could get fined for an over application of a pesticide. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, by using it at the maximum rate all the time, you could actually have some probably plant damage too, because they've already told you that do not use more than 8 ounces, and you've put on 50+% more. So you could also get injury to your crop, your strawberries. So there's 2 problems you'd have if you did the maximum rate. One, which could be something that you could see very quickly yourself by causing damage. But again, you are in violation of the label, and the label is a legal enforceable document. So you are in violation of that, and that is a state offense from the Board of Pesticide Control. So.
It's also worth mentioning that applying lower than the recommended rate is not allowed either, because we can have resistance build up in our pest population.
So Jason, what is the proper way to clean sprayers and pesticide containers?
Right, so this goes back to our core manual and basic training again, but triple rinsing is definitely what we want to be doing whenever you empty out a new pesticide container or when you're working on cleaning out your sprayer. So the theory behind that is that, you know, it really takes 3 applications of clean water to get the majority of that pesticide residue cleaned out of the container or the spray tank and spray nozzles. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that we need to be conscientious about what you do with that rinse water. So ideally, this would all happen over a spray pad, and that water would either be collected in a containment area to be disposed of properly, or it would be potentially sprayed out over a crop field. But you'd have to keep records of that application. So yeah, triple rinsing is really the gold standard when it comes to cleaning out your sprayers and pesticide containers.
So following up another question with you, Jason, what happens if the reliable sprayer applicator leaves the farm or gets sick?
Yeah, so this is really important for all farms to have contingency plans. You never know when an injury or a serious illness might happen, or when someone just has other duties that are going to pull them away from the farm. So it's, again, really important to have these backup plans put in place. And, you know, the foundation of these plans is all based on good record keeping. So you want to have other folks on your farm aware of, you know, what are the standard practices? How do we determine when to go out and spray? What are the rates, and how do we mix up the products, and have that all clearly written down, so that not only can you easily explain to someone who's going to come in and help you to spray how to do that, but you can also look back on past years and say, well, how effective was that spray when we did it in this way, and should we change the way we go about that? So again, you want to have really clear instructions on how to operate the tractor, what speed should the tractor be set on for various spray applications, what PSI and RPMs should the tractor be set to in the sprayer, and what are some of the basic calculations that we use to put on a certain amount of pesticide material for the different crops. So it's good to have these calculations all written out for various scenarios for different pesticide products at different application rates. So if the primary licensed applicator who has a private applicator's license gets sick, they can have someone else on the farm do the applications, as long as that person or those people have been trained as handlers under the worker protection standards. So we're posting the video for that training material right here on this YouTube page. All of these training materials are hosted on the Pesticide Education Resource Collaborative's website, PERC. And they have mandatory posters that anyone who's storing and using pesticides has to have posted at a central area, and they have all sorts of good resources for training your employers. Again, anybody who's working on the farm where pesticides are applied have to be trained as workers under the worker protection standards, and anybody who's going to be spraying product or applying or working in fields before the reentry interval have to be trained as handlers. So, so these folks who are trained as handlers, again, are able to come in and to do spray applications in the scenario that the primary license holder is sick and not able to do that application. Another option is that if you have a neighbor who has their private applicator's license, can come in and spray on your farm as long as there's no exchange of money. So you want to, again, have these good plans in place. You want to reach out to them beforehand, maybe before the season, to explain how you usually do things, and make sure that they're, you know, applying products at the same rate that you would, and keeping good records of those in your spray logbook.
Excellent. So this was a sprayer calibration review. There is much more to learn about sprayer calibration and applying pesticides. We do have a lot of resources on the Cooperative Extension websites. The first is to check out this link, which is online resources relating to nozzles and sprayer calibration videos. We also have the worksheets I mentioned, and you can sign up for a visit from Extension to help you with a calibration. When we do show up for a calibration, it's really important that you have already cleaned out the sprayer and that it's ready to go with water in it. And if all else fails, you can just call your Extension office and we're happy to help. So with that, if you could please take the quiz to receive your commercial pesticide credit for watching this course, that would be great. You are allowed to use this presentation while taking the quiz. You're also allowed to read or look at the transcript while taking the quiz, so it's basically an open book. However, please do not complete the quiz with a friend, and you can use this link to get to the quiz. Thank you very much, and stay safe out there.